Hey everyone, I'm Mike DeLong. Welcome to the Tater Talk podcast, where we explore the fascinating global potato processing industry. We'll share stories and insights about flakes, fries, chips, and crisps, and everything in between. Let's dig in. Hey, welcome back to the Tater Talk podcast, everybody. And today I'm excited to be joined by two leaders from Urschel Labs. It's a company that many would consider the global leader in food cutting technology. So, Tristan and Scott, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
It's Mike.
Yeah, it's really great to have you. We've been trying to coordinate this for a little bit, so I'm glad we could finally get it done. You guys are both joining us from the US this week, but I know you've been traveling the globe and jet setting around the world, spreading the good word, helping clients. Before we get into some background about Urschel and talk about Urschel's place in the potato processing world, I wanted to get to know more about you guys. So Tristan, if we could introduce yourself and what it is you do at Urschel and a bit about how you got here.
Sure. So Tristan Scoble, I'm the director of sales over North America and Mexico. I've been with Urschel since 2016, originally in the Midwest territory for Urschel. So we have 11 sales guys scattered throughout the US. I was in that region for about 5 years, taking up to around 2020 when I moved to Southern California and ran the Southern California territory up into Phoenix, Arizona, and New Mexico. So quite a good geographical spread as a direct boots on ground salesperson. And then around a year ago, I moved into the director of sales role and I love it. Yeah, it's a great company, very rare beast for its age. Been around 116 years. And yeah, I don't think I'll be around that long, but I'll be around a while.
Well, I look forward to learning a bit more about the history of the company as well, and perhaps you could shed some light on that. But let's switch over to Scott. So, Scott, yeah, share with listeners about yourself.
Okay, sure. I've been with Urschel for 20 years. I grew up within the organization in engineering. So the first 10 years of my time, I was designing food processing machines. And then let's see. So I've been at Urschel for 20 years. I started in the engineering side of things. I was a design engineer, designed some dicers that are more for in the meat and cheese markets. And then maybe 10 years ago, I became the manager of the design engineering manager. Did that for 9 years. That's when I started to get more into the potato side of things, as I had a handful of projects that were in that market. And then last year, I got moved into director of new product development and applications. So I'm, in general, the liaison between engineering and sales. Any complicated application, I try to link the best people in engineering with the people in sales to solve the problems.
Very good. Cool. Well, Tristan, you alluded to that, Urschel's a very interesting company. It's been around a long time. If you could maybe share a bit about Urschel's history, like how it got started and how it's evolved to get to this point, hit the high points of that for people that aren't familiar with Urschel.
Sure. So companies have been around since 1910, so very long time. Right now it's on a 4th generation Urschel as CEO. It was actually founded by William Urschel, who invented something called the gooseberry snipper, which was mainly geared towards farmers. And it's kind of like a green bean snipper now in the modern age. However, it was a smaller device to destem gooseberries. Now, I'm British. We still love our gooseberries, gooseberry pie, classic staple. But here in the US, that's not as big of a market there. But that's how Urschel started, really. And it's always been a very strong engineering company based in Northwest Indiana and in Valparaiso, about an hour away from Chicago. And it's those engineering roots has really driven it through the years up into our modern day. We slowly progressed more into the food size reduction world. And now we have a couple of main branches. One is dicers, slicers, used in the potato industry. We are by far the global leader in slicing and for fry cutting on crinkle cuts. We also have a whole brand or different avenue of machinery called the Comitrol, which is making a lot of nut butters, peanut butters. So really anything that is size reduction we do. What's pretty unique about us for an American company is pretty much everything is manufactured in-house apart from electrical components. So we're completely vertically integrated. We have 2 foundries on site, which is very uncommon. And that allows us really to control our manufacturing from the metal that comes in to the machine that leaves the door. Gives us a lot of control. So that's been huge. As we've grown, we have not changed that, which is, yeah, it's something we're very proud of, obviously, and it's a fun company. One other thing that's just pretty interesting is we're actually an employee-owned company, so we're an ESOP. That allows us to get a lot of buy-in from pretty much employees from every level of the plants. It's huge. There's a lot of pride in what we do.
That's interesting. Is the ESOP a recent transition, or was that in place before either of you joined?
No,
So
it's recent.
actually, yeah, it's recent. So I actually started in 2015, the October of 2015. It was announced in February 2016, all company meeting. I thought we'd been sold and was freaking out about my career choice at the time, but it turned out pretty good. So yeah, so we just hit 10 years.
I'm curious to know if that transition to ESOP has contributed to, in a certain way, to whether it's innovation or just the global reach and performance of the company now that it's employee owned.
You know, it's a good question. I think we traditionally are a slow growth company, right? So, you know, as the global economy has grown and as food processing and technology has grown, we've grown with it. What's happened over the last, in my opinion, the last kind of 15 years onwards is really the need for efficiencies with manufacturers, and our equipment often is one of the quickest ways to get there. We eliminate a lot of hand cutting from a small company that's growing. So I think we've seen accelerated growth that way. The ESOP piece of it, I think, has really helped us stay together as we've grown and kind of shrug off the potential for lack of buy-in as you have more bodies in-house. Like when I started, we had about 350 people 10 years ago. Now we're up to 580. So it's, you know, pretty explosive growth for a traditional slow growth company.
Yeah.
I would say, I'll jump in real quick too, Mike. When we started 20 years ago, it was a small enough company that everybody knew the Urschels. And when you're designing equipment, you want to make sure that the piece of equipment that you've designed reflects the name Urschel well, and you have like your friendships with the owners right there to make sure, like, you want to make sure that you come through. And as we've grown, now that we're all shared owners in it, everybody has that shared desire just to make sure that every person that's doing their part for the company is holding up their end of the bargain, just to make sure that the brand stays strong and that the quality and reliability, all those things, you're hitting on all cylinders each time.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Well, thanks for letting us go down that rabbit hole a little bit. I'm sure there's listeners here that are thinking about, transition plans, either as their companies grow or they start to think about retirement or the next thing for themselves. And yeah, that's interesting. Aligned incentives. That's so important these days.
It's so true.
It is.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. So, Tristan, you also mentioned that Urschel is a global leader in size reduction, but also when it comes to the potato industry. So, let's talk about where Urschel fits inside the potato industry, because it's actually pretty broad within the industry.
Sure.
So, and the name's probably recognized, but not all the different products that they may consume, like how much of that actually might go through an Urschel machine of some form.
Yeah. So I'll start with the obvious and I'll get to the more obscure. That's probably not on the tip of people's tongues when they think of us. So the very obvious one is potato chips. So we have a machine called the Model CC. CC stands for chip cutter. And really, there's a lot of chips out there that are cut on our equipment. They either go into a PC, generally a PC line continuous fryer, or they'll go into a kettle fryer. And the reason we have such kind of dominance in that world is holding tolerance is really, really tight. So when we're cutting a potato, we want to make sure we have a real nice, clean, even cut, which is consistent because that helps with the fry time, oil retention, that kind of thing. So chips, CC, then we have our three-dimensional cutters. The biggest one for the large potato guys is Diversicut 2110A. A lot of crinkle cut fries are made on those machines. So three-dimensional dicer, it's actually kind of a Swiss Army knife. You can do a ton of different things. We have dialed that machine in very well for really maximizing yield, low scrap, beautiful cuts on crinkles. And then the more obscure, we go to hash browns. So we make a lot of hash, scrap turned into hash. That's on a Comitrol piece of our equipment, often used for tater tots, hash browns, that kind of thing. And then the real unusual one is actually potato flakes. So and we have our Comitrol is also used for potato flakes. A lot of times we're trying to make sure there's a uniform particle size in potato flakes. So when they go to a reformer, let's throw a brand out there like a Pringles or someone like that, we're making sure it's a nice uniform particle size. The Comitrol series of our machine goes really, really small, and it's not a grind, it's a precision cut, and that really caps and keeps that particle distribution tight.
Scott, maybe this one's for you. Which of those applications tends to be the most technically challenging to do really well?
Yeah, I'd say to do really well is probably potato chips, just because we want the chip itself to have a standard deviation of 2,000ths or less, so 0.002 inches. And if you see standard deviation that climbs significantly higher than that, like Tristan alluded to, you start to get oil take-up issues. You might see one side of the chip be burnt while the other side is undercooked. So in order to produce a high quality chip, we need to hit exacting tolerances. So in order for the chip to have 0.002 deviation, the parts must be considerably better than that. And that gets really complicated. So, but that's kind of goes back to what Tristan was saying. Since we have everything in-house, the ability to chase back if there's ever an issue in-house, we can chase it back to the previous operation, understand what went wrong, correct the problems. Just so when anything leaves the building, it's spot on. And we also find that what was acceptable, the CC is a really old machine. What was acceptable in the industry maybe 20 or 30 years ago is no longer acceptable. So it was very complicated, I think, to set our original slicing heads. So some of the stuff we did in the last 10 years came out with the SL14, which makes it much easier for end customers to set their slice opening. And we're finding that that is helpful as well. And then we find that it's one thing that when it leaves Urschel, that it has to be spot on, but we're trying to design equipment that can live in the environment of a production facility, which is a considerably more complicated environment than anything that our lab could show. And so we end up sending out these heads with gauges and instructions on how, every day you can reset that head back to get that exact perfect slice that you need. Because once it leaves our production facility, that's when its life really begins. It goes through some pretty hard days, I think, at some of our customers' facilities. So we're trying to design things in so that you can always bring it back to how it was on day one. So that's
I can imagine. I mean, the conditions are pretty brutal.
Yeah.
Whether the changes in raw or foreign material or just running much longer than it should between knife changes and things like that.
Yeah, I think sometimes, we know what goes into the part, so we handle everything just really delicately. And then sometimes you go to certain customers and they handle it much differently. And, they're slamming it down, but you always have the ability, even if you do, handle it a little bit rougher or, stuff gets dropped also, when it goes into a clean out of place tank, it gets dropped in. It sees a pretty harsh environment as it's being washed next to something else. So when it comes out of there, we have to help reset it back to zero, get it all set back in. Our hope is that month after month, year after year, you can keep making that, standard deviation of under 0.002. That's
It's an interesting conundrum because you have potatoes which are grown underground where rocks are, obviously, and rocks can, potatoes can grow around rocks. And so you can do everything you want to try and sort out foreign material, but at the end of the day, it's going to happen at some point. And so you're dealing with that. On the other hand, you have to have high precision, and high precision and rocks at volume don't go very well together. So having a really robust piece of equipment that is completely tailored to be able to be dialed back in to down to as Scott mentioned, 2000 standard deviation it's interesting. It's kind of fun. We have come up with a pretty good solution, but it's taken us a very long time to really get something that is just borderline indestructible.
Scott, you alluded to why that precision matters. You talked about oil uptake and other things. When it comes to chips, and not just chips, I guess, it could be some of the products Tristan mentioned, like crinkle cut French fries. What are probably like the top 3 aspects why cutting performance actually matters? And that's pretty broad. So maybe we just pick a product and talk about that a little bit. And Tristan, you can decide which product you want to talk about, or yeah, let's go there.
Yeah. So I know, like, in potato chips, it's such high volumes going through that, as you're slicing, if you are cutting with duller blades, you're disrupting more of the potato cells. It lets the starch out of the cell. And so you're just losing starch, the starch is not attached to the chip as it goes into the fryer. So you have less weight in the bag. Simple things like that. So it's just yield. If you do, so kind of what Tristan was alluding to, we want ideally one potato up against a paddle. That potato can't move as it's being sliced. If it moves, then you start to lose your slice thickness variation. But also, and then also as it moves, you produce scrap, unwanted chips. And so that's just a loss of yield. So anything we can do to maximize the weight coming out, going into a bag relative to the weight coming in, it's really important to our end user. One other thing I was thinking about, Tristan, we didn't talk about this particular product, but we're also doing the lattice cut. And that's more and more popular.
The lattice cut, or some people call it a waffle fry, like at Chick-fil-A, for instance. Yeah.
Yep. And as Chick-fil-A's gotten more popular, our lattice lines have gotten more popular too. And that's also important because if the slice thickness isn't right, you lose the windows in the waffle, that we'll call it. And so again, you got it. And then, you don't want, if it's too thin, then it produces way too high of a scrap percentage. So that's also really key, hitting that slice thickness just right in order to get the right look.
What could I forget about the waffle?
Oh, no.
Yeah.
That's a
I
staple.
was gonna bring you back to ask about that as well, but Scott got us there, so that's good.
One other thing just an add on the slice quality and consistency is oil is more expensive than potatoes. And that's a big factor. You have a high volume, low margin business where you're trying to pump out beautiful quality chips. That's first and foremost, right? But also, the bottom line on your consumable products like your oil is a big deal. So if you get a poor quality cutting chip, you often have some like micro cracking on the surface of a chip, and that also allows more oil to penetrate up into that potato. And that goes, for everything. It also in the fry world as well, it can have an impact.
Yeah, I mean, as I was coming up in the fry world, I always remember these guys and gals telling me, the money can be really made or lost in the cutting operation, especially at these volumes, right? Because of the yield, because of the oil uptake and other issues, like on a fry line specifically, a lot of that feathering that you
Mm,
mentioned can significantly increase the amount of oil absorption and affect cost quite a lot, or the amount of waste that you're throwing away due to bad cuts not meeting specification for length and so on. So it's incredibly important. I agree 100%. In your experience, where do the processing customers that you have the best opportunity to improve their performance when it comes to cutting? Like, what aren't they not paying close enough attention to? They could
it's a
be
great
looking at
question. I'm gonna let Sean
packaging or
go.
frying. I just said cutting is extremely important. I'm sure you guys would agree with me, but when it
Yeah.
comes to the cutting, what are they not paying close enough attention to?
So, I mean, what we see that the customers that struggle are not measuring so if it's in potato chips, they're not measuring their raw cut product. So, that's one thing we do when I'm going into plants. The first thing I just try to do is start the conversation to make sure we're all talking standard deviation of like the slice variation. Uh, let's talk about that. Then I start telling them what I'll do is I'll bring measurement equipment and start measuring slices in front of them just so they can see like this is how we do it back at our labs. If you want to maximize your yield, this is something to do. We find that people that are struggling might just be looking, like, oh, yeah,
Mhm.
it looks about right.
Looks right. Yeah.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden they're having a really hard time with oil take up or something like that. Uh, and that's when we can come in and it's sometimes too, like if they have some of our older equipment, it is more complicated to set. It is more likely to move after you've ran for 8 hours or you hit rocks. So I mean, obviously there's some motivation for us as well, just to be like, to want to talk standard deviation. And then that gives us a great opportunity to show some of our newer equipment, you know, but
Hmm.
that's what we normally see is their best chance. Probably two things. It's just to talk standard deviation, but then it's also to talk about knife life.
Hmm.
People try to minimize their expenses, I think, and so they'll try to run knives that are considerably worn, or parts that made up to those knives that have hit a number of rocks, and so now the knife doesn't sit in, as perfectly as we'd like to see it. And then
Hmm.
we can kind of just step back and be like, yeah, you're pushing. It's like you're trying to push an axe through a potato to create a chip. It's not going to work. So we put in some new fresh parts and then show them that, yeah, you can generate high quality chips again.
They may be looking at the knife spend on their P&L and not necessarily even have visibility to the change in yield
Yep.
or oil consumption. And the
Cause
key is
yeah,
looking at
Yeah.
cutting performance. Yep.
yeah. Cause it does. I mean, sometimes it happens slowly over time
Drift. Yep.
or, as people retire and they take some of that knowledge with them maybe. And
Yep.
then next thing you know, yeah, you have your knife spend looks great because that's a really easy thing to measure. It's far more complicated to measure slice thickness, standard deviation, and yield loss, starch loss, things like that.
Yeah. It's especially when you're dealing with potatoes that change every day. And
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and that's
exactly.
yeah, you hit it on the head on that, Mike, because the gravity alone of a potato can change the way it actually comes out of the cutting head. So we can have a perfectly set head one day, and then product changes, and we need to adjust for gravity on the next to make sure we get that 55 thousandths chip or whatever it is, whatever the target is. And just that alone, the compound from just that one head to your balance sheet at the end of the month it's huge. I mean, it's just so exponential. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah. And would you say the same thing applies to other, not just chips, but the other cutting applications? Measure the raw cut size,
Yeah,
look
I
at
would. I mean, it
quality.
depends on
Yeah.
what you're talking about. So you go to the fresh cut world, and we have a big presence in all of the pre-cut and ready-made salads. That we more get into a conversation about shelf life, because if you have dull knives or poorly maintained shear clearances of the machine, and you're cutting, let's say, a romaine or an iceberg, well, then your shelf life is trashed, and that's
Interesting.
huge.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a huge piece of that pie that often kind of doesn't get thought about until there's a problem usually, and then we're like, let's start with the very first thing. How's the cut looking?
Interesting. I'm going to switch more, if we could, to about innovation at Urschel. And Scott, I think this is a lot in your house. You've talked about innovation on machines that have existed for many years. How do you approach innovation inside Urschel today, whether it's those existing legacy machines and making improvements to those, or whether it's like a completely new cutting application or challenge, some oddball cut that a processor wants to invent, perhaps?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we kind of have two separate lanes probably at Urschel. We are always trying to take our older machines and modify them so that they meet the needs of our customers today. Um, two major changes from 30 years ago to today. One is what is acceptable from a maintenance perspective to keep some of our stuff running that was 30-year-old plus equipment. You have really well-trained maintenance people that have been there for years, I think, to we get really comfortable to do it, but it's complicated. Like some of our stuff that's 30 plus years old, it's just there's no way around it but to say it's more complicated. And so we're trying to take all of those complicated pieces of our machines and make it far less complicated
Mhm.
so that it can maybe take that work out of a maintenance crew and put it more into the operations side of things. So that's our first goal when it comes to like freshening our old equipment. And the second thing is sanitary standards. It's for sure in the fresh cut industry, cheese, meat, the industries like that, you need to be able to make machines that are easy to disassemble, easy to sanitize, and then easy to reassemble. And some of our equipment that was 30 plus years old left room for improvement.
Mhm.
So I feel like we've done a really, really excellent job over the last 10 years of just knocking out older machines from our lineup and replacing them with far easier to use, far easier to clean. That'd be one avenue. And then we also have um our innovation and development I&D group at Urschel, and it's uh, more of an offsite group that is interested in trying new cuts, new things that will require a lot of experimentation.
Okay.
And so we always have our ear to the ground, listening to feedback that is coming through Tristan and our sales group um, globally. And a lot of that will kind of funnel my way. And then we'll try to make assessments on what we think we could practically make. And then we'll start
Mhm.
to play with that. So those are the exciting projects.
Mhm.
But, it's the trick is always is finding the right ones, ones that'll have the biggest impact in the industry, not ones that are necessarily, just satisfying a niche market. Is that a fair
Right.
statement, Tristan?
Yeah, I would agree. I think, you know, the two avenues you explain well is exactly right. Constantly innovating and making sure our old equipment is called a Model CC, but my goodness, that thing is there's so much under the hood that's unrecognizable from 10 years ago that we've changed. Just
Mhm.
small tweaks because we know we've got a good operating principle. And then on the I&D side, we just came out actually 1st of May with a completely new concept to dicing, Little Gem Aspire Dicer. It's really revolutionary in the way dices and cuts because we actually eradicate a full spindle, a circular spindle. So the cost of ownership is massively less. And we now have a new kind of entry to the Urschel lineup. And that took us a couple of years, 3 years in development to really make sure what we brought to market is going to live up to the Urschel name. So
And was
pretty
that
fun.
a customer driven development exercise, or this is more like sensing what was needed and you internally developed that and brought it to market?
Yeah, that's a great question. So right now with our reach, I mean, we have offices all over the world, direct Urschel employees. We have distribution as well, but we have a ton of direct offices. So the actual feedback we get on the marketplace from our own employees through sales and service and support is pretty big. So there's a need for a high quality, smaller dicer that was pretty apparent to us, but it wasn't just, here's a less expensive dicer, go have it. It's more, here's a less expensive dicer that is really easy to operate. I mean, we're talking about school districts and, these large central kitchens that need something that is going to be high capacity, but they may not have a full maintenance team or what have you. So it has to be easy to operate and use daily. And then as well, just the cost of ownership, because we make, as I said before, a ton of stuff ourselves, which is great, but they're high precision. It gets expensive if you had a dicer, for example, and you wanted it to do 7 different cuts. They add up. That whole total cost of ownership with all the knives and changeouts add up. So we saw an opportunity or a need in our customer base, and that's what we addressed. We pumped out that project. We're on to the next one. We're on to the next one. We're really trying to bring new technology to the market.
Having that global reach and all those different perspectives and ideas, that's got to be challenging to sort through and decide what to prioritize.
It is. I mean, Scott can attest to this, but everyone's got their blinkers on, right? I definitely have in North America and Latin America. I know what I need, but there's a different need in Europe, different need in Asia. Scott has more of that global oversight. What do you think, Scott?
It's consistent. Like the guys in Asia, what their needs are is typically the opposite of what the guys in Switzerland are asking for, and what they're willing to spend. And so we're getting feedback from one part of the world, and we know that will positively affect their specific market, but we know it'll have the inverse response in other markets. So we try to get everything put on the table. We try to get everybody in the room so they can also understand, how we're trying to juggle some of these requirements. And then the truth is that some machines are geared more for certain markets than others. We know that we can't make a machine that's going to cover the globe, but we are going to make maybe the basic framework of a machine. And then you can put these options on it, and it'll address the customer base in the United States. If I put these options on it, it'll address the customer base in Asia. Trying to do it the best we can, because we don't want people. We don't want our customers in Asia to have to deal with design improvements that we made for the United States that all it will be is have adverse effects for them, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not necessarily one size fits all, right?
Yeah.
What about when you have a customer or potential customer that's looking at a new product that they want to work with Urschel to develop? So how would you approach that? And if you could like share a story of an example to kind of paint the picture of, if you can, to describe how you approach that new product development process with a client or a customer.
So we love it, honestly. Laboratories is in our name. That's
Yep.
what we do.
That's
We test. We test, and that's what we've done since the beginning of time. We are engineering and fact based. So Chesterton, Indiana is our global headquarters, but we have labs throughout the world, just depending on the market. But in the US, we run everything in Chesterton, Indiana. We have 5 test lab technicians all day, Monday through Friday, running tests, basically depending on what the customer needs. Often the customer will come to us and have a little bag of product, and they'll say, hey, I want to make this. And then our lab goes, okay, we've got 50 different types of machines we can use. We're going to go down this avenue. And we try. It's a true test, right? And we have a full chef's kitchen, a lot of auxiliary equipment in Chesterton, Indiana. We can link up and run things too. We also recently partnered with a company called Cronin out of Germany, which make washers, dryers, peelers, you name it. So really a customer can come in and we can just make whatever they want. You asked about an example, and I can think of one which is fascinating to me because it came in my inception with Urschel, and that is the TVP boom. So texturized vegetable proteins. And where I'm going with that is imitation meats, right? So you had all of the companies, the borderline household names back in 2019, 2020, 2021, where this was all going crazy. A customer would come to us and say, instead of, hey, I want to make a burger, and they don't bring a burger in the bag. Instead, they say, hey, I need to make this particulate size, and it needs to be consistent here, but I do want fines or scrap because it goes into the end product and helps bind together. And they just come to us with a bunch of different formulations of TVP. We run a bunch of different equipment, and we say, hey, here you go. Here's your size. Now, that's all well and good for the majority of the time, but sometimes, and the reason I say use TVP as an example is that's often off a hot extrusion process. And no matter what you do in a lab, there's certain processes that you need to be at a customer's facility to truly replicate. So we would start out in a lab, do everything we can there, say, hey, we think we've got it pretty dialed in. And then we'll actually take that piece of equipment and go to their facility and make sure it's dialed in if we think it's necessary. But a lot of that comes off the back of, we've been doing this so long. The knowledge we have in our building is outrageous, so we have just so much knowledge that we're able to build on to make sure we get to where the customer wants to be.
That's fascinating, actually.
It's a lot of fun, man. I never knew food cutting could be so cool, but it's a lot of fun.
It does sound like a lot of fun. I need to come visit and play in the lab
You
for
gotta do
some
it,
time, I think. I don't know if you guys can talk about this, but I am curious what work, if any, have you guys done to evaluate the impact of heft treatment on potatoes when it comes to cutting, whether it's for potato chip processing or for French fry or other, you know, frozen potato product cutting? Have you done any of that?
So I've done some with potato chip cutting. Um, and this would have been maybe 6, 7, 8 years ago. And we were seeing the surface of the chips. What we were doing is we were trying to see how the cells would rupture as you would peel off a potato chip. And if you have a untempered potato, if you have a cold potato, typically one side of that potato gets a little micro cracking, and it ruptures, like deeply ruptures cells. And you'll get, if you put iodine on the surface of the potato, you can see where the cells have been ruptured. And when you do PEF, it just I'm not exactly sure if it's rupturing all the cells just like very mildly, but what you see is you get much less like deep cracking, and you make pretty nice slices off, it's just off of the SL14 at the time was what we were testing.
Mhm.
And at the time we were going through many different knife varieties, because we were trying to get the longest lasting knife that would not shatter when it's hit by a rock. Because if a knife shatters when a rock hits it, then now you have that potentially in the fryer. The goal is not to make the hardest knife possible that lasts the longest, because when you hit a rock, now you've got a serious problem. So our goal is to make the hardest knife possible that still crumples when a rock hits it. Like when a car is in an accident, there's like a crumple zone.
Mhm.
We want the knife to do the same thing so that we don't lose any piece of the knife into the fryer. So we were just doing a lot of this experimentation with all these different knife types. And when you had PEFT product compared to unPEFT product, you had a lot more flexibility in what you cut with, and you still got I'd say like a more evenly distributed surface that you cut against. We also see it in other root vegetables like sweet potatoes, carrots. We're trying to make, so the diverse cut doesn't just make French fries, it also will make like a long noodle, like a carrot almost, like a carrot noodle, zucchini noodle, all these. And you could, if it's a PEFT carrot or sweet potato, you could take that noodle and, tie it in a bow tie. Whereas if it's not, it just shatters. So we would get really nice looking cuts off of carrots and sweet potatoes compared to the potential like shattering that you get.
Mhm.
But in the potato world, and my experience with PEF was as we were trying to develop knives slicing potatoes. I don't know if Tristan, if you had anything to add there.
No, I think you nailed it. It really, I think it just, I'm not a scientist in that way. And I know, Mike, probably a lot more about PEF than me, but it seems to really penetrate that cell structure and just allow for ease of cut. I think in the fry world, chip world, I think it's taken off maybe a little more than the fry world, I would say, potentially. Mike can probably attest to that.
It's anybody producing at scale in the fry world has moved
Yeah.
to PEF
They
technology.
moved to PEF completely.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And it's mainly for scrap purposes. Is that one of the biggest advantages, Mike? do you think?
Benefits in French fries are, the cut quality to, improve yield, reduce breakage,
Yeah.
and reduce scrap.
Yeah.
But the point Scott was making where you see less feathering,
Mm-hmm.
that translates to reduced oil pickup in the fryer
Yeah.
for French fries as well. And then because of those microporations, the product releases excess starches in the blancher a little easier. It releases moisture in the drying process a little easier, and in the frying process a little easier. So there's energy benefits along the way
Mm.
as well. I don't have much experience with it in the potato chip world. It's, I understand it's common on the PC lines, much less so on kettle chip lines for different reasons. But yeah, I was curious what work, if any, had you guys had exposure to in that area, because it seems to be coming quite more common, and it does have some advantages.
Yeah, I would say it definitely makes product coming off of dicers and slicers. It just makes it look far more uniform. Anything that would have a potential for fracturing, like a sweet potato, once you've PEF'd it, then it just looks beautiful.
Yeah.
The analogy of the bow tie is so true, because
Mhm.
you take something that's
Yeah.
PEF'd and it's just so much more malleable. It's pretty
Yeah.
incredible.
100%. Yeah. Yeah. If anybody's enjoyed curly fries, and you can imagine now a puffed curly fry, you can actually like stretch it out to like, several feet long at some point,
The whole
sometime
potato.
before it's fried. Yeah. Cool. No, that's interesting. About the innovation work. And we talked about how trends drive, so they inform some of that new product development or machine development that you're doing, Tristan and Scott. Where in the potato world globally, I'm curious what trends you're seeing on a global basis in the potato world. Let's take on the chip side, for instance. Is there different requirements, different priorities? What are processors talking about? What are they struggling with? And where do you see kind of like what's the temperature of the industry, I guess, in places you serve?
Good question. I would say we've seen in the last 5-6 years a decent expansion on potato chips and fries. Really, there's been a decent expansion over the last 5-6 years. What we're seeing is, I think we're maybe plateauing or not seeing the level of greenfield build outs on the horizon as we have previously, especially in North America. And I just think that's economic cycles and also a little bit to do with consumer trends. It's really interesting. I was at Snackspo a few months ago, and talking about with a bunch of different people about Ozempic, believe it or not, the
Sure.
weight loss
Yeah.
drug, and how that is really having an impact on consumer sentiment and what they're purchasing. Something I never in a million years thought about until someone mentioned it to me. I was like, well, that makes sense. So I think there's a trend and a look towards healthier snacks, almost back to, 2010 when everything was popping up baked rather than fried. I think we'll start to look at some newer innovation there, maybe some shifting of marketing from some of the big players. That's just my kind of thought where we're going. Also, you've seen, it's a M&A world where we've seen some acquisitions of late, which have been some consolidations from some of the larger guys. So it's interesting. And at the same time, I mean, you have smaller chip guys coming online with smaller production facilities rather than these larger ones. So I got a feeling we're going to see some innovation in the snack world in the next few years. It'll be pretty interesting to see, and we'll probably have them come in our lab at some point and be testing out some pretty interesting stuff.
Interesting. Scott, what are you seeing on the innovation from the feedback from customers that's driving your innovation? You already
Yeah.
talked about, the need for sanitation and
hmm
probably maintenance simplification. Anything else that you think might drive what you do the next few years?
Yeah. I think, I mean, I guess the majority of the feedback I get is kind of engineering related. So it is going to be making modifications just to make the equipment easier to use, more self-explanatory, but at the same time, meet the exacting standards that they need over the course of many years. So, um, I think it's probably kind of very much along the lines what I was sharing earlier.
Yeah. Well, the tag, the kind of the buzz that you hear now is it's more difficult to find good people to do some of these things, right?
hmm
And there's talks of lights out factories, which is not necessarily realistic in places where you need to maintain and check, cutting equipment on
hmm
a regular basis, unless you want to lose your ass, I guess. But no, that's interesting. I mean, it's kind
But
of
the
the
truth
common.
is, Mike, we do see when you go into a lot of these facilities, it's really thin, uh, and the number of operators that you'll see, and all of our equipment is probably being driven from a machine control
Yep.
center, and they're monitoring amp draw on our impellers, and
Yeah.
there's, photo eyes looking to see if there's any potatoes backing up. So you are able to do a lot of things electronically without necessarily being present. So we are ensuring that when we're designing equipment, we give these drops to go back to the machine control
Yep.
systems so that it doesn't require somebody orbiting the machines constantly.
Yeah, good point. That's really interesting. So, guys, we've covered a lot. What did we miss, Tristan? Was there anything that we had hoped to get to that we didn't?
Mike, honestly, I think we really hit a lot. I think this is a great conversation. I don't really see much that we missed. Scott, anything
No,
on your end?
no, I think everything that I was thinking about covering, it came up.
Yeah, you guys gave me a good education, and I know our listeners will get a lot out of it as well. So I really appreciate you guys taking the time to share about yourselves and look under the hood of Urschel and in the potato world. It's been great. I appreciate it a lot.
No.
Yeah,
Thanks for having us, Mike. We really appreciate it, and you're welcome. Welcome our place anytime.
Yeah, we'll
that's
make
right.
that happen for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll make
All
sure I'm
right,
around
guys.
to give you a tour.
Yeah, definitely. We'll
Perfect.
figure something out.
Sounds
Definitely.
great.
All right, guys. Super. Thanks a lot.
Okay. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If so, subscribe so you don't miss future shows. And of course, share it with a friend. And please leave us a review or rating. Your feedback really helps us bring you the best possible potato content. Be sure to check out the Tater Talk Podcast YouTube channel and other social platforms. To learn more about me and how I help potato processors grow their business, check me out on LinkedIn or at www.projectsconsultants.com. That's PROJEX consultants.com. So, thanks for tuning in. We'll be back soon, but until then, eat more fries.